Are you a figurehead people leader, or do you actually have an acting seat at the executive table? Mindy Honcoop, founder of Agile in HR, shares how to identify the difference and what to do about it.
Hey there, I'm Krista Vance, entrepreneur and operations leader.
And I'm Matt Vance, award-winning author and social innovation researcher. We're your hosts of the Culture Profit Podcast.
Your place for purposeful company culture strategy.
Learn from HR pros, executives, and thought leaders how to prioritize profits by prioritizing people.
This episode is sponsored by MeBeBot, the best friend of forward-thinking HR leaders, helping you strengthen your employer reputation as a reflection of your real culture.
Learn more at mebeBot.com.
Thank you, everyone. Today, joining us from Austin, Texas, we're excited to welcome a seasoned Chief People Officer and HR advisor for a big discussion. Everything is bigger in Texas, so of course today's conversation will be as well. We're going to be talking about HR's seat at the executive table. Thanks for joining us, Mindy.
Thank you so much, Matt and Krista. It's such a pleasure to be here.
We're excited to have you. Mindy Honcoop has spent 20 years as a people leader and HR advisor. She guides leaders to optimize their work to thrive as a fractional HR executive, facilitator, advisor, and speaker. Before founding Agile in HR, Mindy held a chief people officer role at TCP Software and HR leadership roles at Care.com, Spiceworks, Ziff Davis, and Expedia. Mindy is also the VP of Customer Strategy and Ops at MeBeBot. Mindy sits on the nonprofit Love Justice International Board, co-founded the Austin Women in Agile meetup, and is the lead co-organizer in launching Disrupt HR Austin. When she's not busy with people, she can be found reading, walking her dogs, traveling, or hiking. Fellow hiker, we love hiking too.
And you live in the heart of hiking in Utah.
We really do. We got out to Texas last summer, and there's not as many mountains.
We have a lot of hills. We have some lovely hills in the hill country. I was born and raised in Seattle, Washington, and the nature is your playground, and I've spent a lot of time there hiking.
So do you have a favorite hike in Texas? I'm just curious.
Or do you try to get outside of Texas to do your hiking?
Yeah, try to get outside of Texas to do my hiking. I feel like the definition of hiking requires a significant amount of elevation gain.
Yeah.
And so my husband and I say that we go on a lot of treks here.
Okay.
We go trekking. I think I picked that up from a colleague that was Australian, and I was like, wow, that's a really great way to describe what I feel like I do in Texas.
That's awesome.
Well, not to make you jealous, but I mean, you're totally right. Utah has more, hikes and trails. So when you come out this way someday, there's lots of stuff to explore. Like we did a little, we'll call it a walk today because
we didn't get much elevation gain, but we do have a cool trail right by our house, and like we go one block and it feels like we're in nature. We hear water running, we hear birds. It's awesome.
Oh man, that is exactly what it felt like when I was living in Switzerland for 3.5 years. You just step right outside and you. I try to remind myself every morning to just take a moment and pause and just take that in, because it's so easy to take it for granted because you see it every day, but not everyone gets the blessing of being able to do that. So that's so awesome.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we want to hear more about how you ended up in HR and what led to all your career success.
Of course, Krista. So I came about HR through the world of social work, actually. I went to the University of Washington. I had a goal to be a social worker from a young age, actually. It was a little paragraph in my psychology book in high school, talked about social work. And I was like, it explains exactly what I want to do. And so University of Washington was ranked 3rd in the nation at the time. And so as I was going through the program, there were internships like towards the end of your journey in that program. And, as I went through those internships, I just started to see the people that I was working with, the individuals. I really saw the volunteers that were coming in to interact with them had such greater impact in their lives. And that really started to get me to question, how can I have greater impact in their lives? And is social work the way to do that? And I often, I was working with youth, and there's a lot of things that would come up in my conversations about their parents, or lack of presence of their parents, or the adults in their community, and the workplaces, and how that was impacting them, often in a negative way, and how that really impacted the interactions that these young people were having with the adults, and the behaviors that they were seeing as a result, and how they were picking up some of what they thought was healthy behaviors that were not. And these are often when I started to really dig in, not that it is a causation, right? It's not a direct cause, but there is such a great high percentage of these things were coming from the result of these adults being in unhealthy workplaces. And so I felt if I could create healthier workplaces, I could be positively impacting this youth in a greater way and creating healthier communities, healthier society. So that's always been a calling for me. And I left. I could have gone one more year and become a master's in social work because it was an accelerated program, but I decided to leave without a job. So that was a big risk, but I had the confidence to really be able to take social work into the workplace.
Such a clear connection between the two, really. And when work is such a big part of your life, it really does impact the community when your experience at work is better and more positive.
Yeah. And we're all humans. And what I love about social work is that it really is it's people-centered. You're starting with the person and designing for them, understanding the ecosystem that they're in, and you're doing project management without realizing it's really that current state analysis, understanding and building with that person what's a future desired state, and then really thinking what are those micro steps that we take to be able to get from where we're at today to get to that future desired state, and really build check-ins and see how are things going. Is this still serving you? Is it not? How are we building the right healthy community tools and resources, the people to surround around this human to get them to that future desired state in their journey to that? And that kind of is project management from a very high level. It's a rudimentary description, but it's with the human at the center. It's about going back to them. And there's just so much about being a human, about what motivates us, what drives our behavior. And I think often, without getting to that level of granularity when we're thinking about employees in our workplace ecosystems, really, when we think about, what's happening at an ecosystem level, and we start to ask, simply even just one thing you can start asking is why? 5 times. Are we asking why down to that human person level, and really understanding, what's underlying those emotions, and like what's getting to how someone is acting up or behaving in a workplace. And so that's where I found like kind of the benefit of that lens, coming in to workplaces with the social work perspective that really kind of helped add value, and that was missing. And so, as I learned throughout my career and the different opportunities I had in the tech space, and had awesome experiences to be able to learn about Agile frameworks and about user-centered design, and how can we blend that and put it from a human-centered perspective, it's kind of brought me to where I am today, to be able to really think about, as we're building people strategies, how do we use these frameworks to really create an iterative, creating milestones, breaking things down, learning, being data centered, to take our people initiatives and tie them back to that business strategy that we from an organizational capability standpoint truly really need to think first about our people, the process, and the systems. And just when we do invest time in those things equally, that's when the magic starts to happen. That's when you start to see the level of engagement that we are so desiring, because we often see that companies work on process and systems in silos. Even it's not even together. I think there's so much also just about coming together and being able to build that strategy truly as one team. And so when we do, but often the people is left towards the end, or behind, or not even, and often in a silo on an island with maybe a moat around it and a castle, a fortified wall. And so it's really about how do we break down those silos, because often, IT professionals feel the same way, right? They feel like they're on an island. So how do we start to break down those barriers to be able to truly look at people, process, and systems equally, and be able to think about, when we're thinking about strategy and about, especially around change. I mean, change is just a part of work. It's about running our businesses, change. And as we think about those things, and we taking that strategy and operationalizing it and bringing it down from that executive conversation down to our managers, down to even our janitor, to get at to what is our why as an ecosystem, down to you as a janitor, what's your why to come to work every day and feel motivated and understand how you're creating an impact, and what your purpose is here.
Man, that's incredible. I think, and I've got a lot of thoughts from what you've already shared, which is awesome that we're jumping right into the meat so quickly. Like, it reminds me of not long ago, last year, I was at the Bridgerland SHRM chapter annual conference. That's our local SHRM chapter here in Cache Valley. And there were some comments around moments of crisis for certain individuals with stress and anxiety and depression and different concerns. And several different people shared comments of just caring about the person and helping that individual in that moment. And the conversation wasn't just about being reactive, but about how can we better prepare to support people in those crisis moments. And I think HR it can be, when it's functioning properly, kind of like the heart of the company, this system of care, of individual care, of prioritizing the people above profits, and reminding the organization that when we have that order of operations, that we are putting profits first, because we're taking care of the people who are the business. Like, there is no business that operates, at least that I'm aware of, that operates 100% without human input. And I think it also requires really good leadership at the head of the HR department, which I think kind of guides us into the next question here is, in your opinion, Mindy, what is the difference between a figurehead CHRO and a real one? And how often do you feel like that CHRO role is just a figurehead versus, a real leader, a true equal member of the executive team?
Such a good question. And I think from my perspective, when I speak to people, even if because CHRO is often at that large enterprise, right? That's a title at these large enterprise organizations. I find this even down to just your head of people, and a 50 person or 100 person startup is, for me, when people say, Mindy, do I actually have a seat at the table? I'm here, but I don't feel like I'm being heard. And that's where you start to see this frustration. And this is when, yes, there's a seat at the table. And I think that's where you're getting to around, am I just a figurehead? And why am I here? If I'm not being listened to, if I'm just supposed to go and take the tasks that are given to me, I'm trying to advise and guide, but I'm just getting shut down. Or the executive team seems to buy into it, but it keeps getting stopped because the board is coming back with a different direction. Do I have access to the board? Do I know who's on the board? Do I get to speak with the board and interact with those members if there's a board? Usually, or the investors, right? Whoever that group is, depending on the organization that you're in. I think the answers to those questions determine if you're a figurehead or are you co-shaping and co-directing with that executive team the strategic direction and how you're operationalizing and communicating and creating an execution against that strategy. And so I think if you're answering no to those questions, no, I'm just sitting here, then I think that you are limited in the ability to be able to be co-shaping and co-directing, which is very frustrating for people. Maybe one of your questions is like, how does it lead to that?
Yeah.
Kind of what I'm seeing right now is, and it's kind of sad because when you do have someone that's in that seat, often, they're hired with the best of intent. They're hired with all these great ideas, but often, when they're interviewing, they maybe kind of picked up on, hey, is there clear outcomes that you have for this role? Maybe there wasn't. And they felt, okay, I'm going to come in and clarify those outcomes. But is that what this executive team wanted? Did they see this position as driving towards outcomes or just tasks and activities? And so often we get hired into this position that someone has some really great intent, but once that person's in role, if they just start being asked to be just task and tactical, that's not even connected to the strategy, it's often limited. It's kind of like they're put in a box and that person is trying to like break out, but often sometimes it does get stuck in a box. And then sometimes what I start to see is that person gets burnt out and then they'll go into another organization, right? They unfortunately lose this great talent that they didn't even know that they had. And sometimes it's just because the CEOs and the executives, let's just assume best intent, they didn't know because they've never seen or been in an organization where someone actually was utilizing their chief people officer in a strategic way. And you don't know what you don't know. That sometimes happens. And so when you start to look at budget and you're in a tough place as a company, where do you start to try and like be able to hit those numbers and you're getting guidance from your investors and your board? Often you start thinking about, okay, where's the spend? And unfortunately, some of those first places that get cut is then these very just what they think is just task and tactical spend, which is often the people team. And then you see that senior person, that role get cut. And then the junior person is often left. And yet they're still getting asked the same questions. And so there's a need for it. They're struggling. They're trying to, but I think that it's hard to be able to get out of that box, is that if that executive team doesn't know how to shift the narrative or shift their mindset.
Yeah, sometimes those expenses, they seem more frivolous, right? And I think what I would ask is, how can we convince those who are in charge of the budget that those spends are not frivolous? How can we, and why should HR leadership contribute more to these bigger decision and planning?
Yeah. And how do we move it from, you're exactly right. How do we move the narrative from being a spend to an investment so that by investing in people, how are we actually driving profits forward? How are we thinking about our customer experience and internalizing that into employee experience? And how is that actually tied together as one experience? I think that, in working with our our executive team and our finance team, it's often about, thinking about it from an operationalization and kind of about your capability standpoint. And for me, when I go into organizations as a fractional leader, it's really about understanding kind of that current state. Where are you frustrated? Where are some of those major pain points? And often when you start to think about, even from a productivity standpoint, wow, what I'm hearing you say is that you're frustrated with how the humans are behaving in this organization. And they're like, that's an interesting training. No, I'm talking about the same thing. It doesn't seem that people understand what I'm saying. Why aren't people aligned? Why are people like leaving because they don't feel like they're getting heard, that there's no direction? I feel like as an executive team, we're providing them with direction. Well, but what happens if that's changing every month? Or how are we delivering the message down to the individual contributor? How are our managers set up to be successful to deliver these messages? Have we trained and give them the right resource? It's just such an onion peeled. But if you start it from a productivity standpoint and the profit and the shared pain points, and you start to kind of then start to see and surface these people issues that are underneath, and why are your processes no longer working? Or you put in a new system, but we didn't think about the people it was impacting. Did we talk to the people? Do we know how they're doing their jobs every day? It's just some of these like questions are like, oh, I hadn't thought about it in that way. It's really about when, so it's like from a key stakeholder management, right? Building that trusted relationship, being able to, when we ask when you go to ask someone, we shouldn't just go and ask them the day before, I want to make this change. Like as an HR person, we need to like build that relationship, to build the buy-in, to bring the executive back to here's the current state analysis. Here's where I hear you want us to go, but here's what's holding us back. And here's our shared pain points that I've heard from all of us as executives. Here's some thoughts about where could we go, but you're taking them along on a journey. You're not going to them, hey, we need to do this right now because people are leaving. No, we've gone back and really understood, first of all, let's take a step back and understand together as a group where we at and what's holding us back and what is that shared pain. And let's start with that thing. And what are the people, process, and systems, and being able to see the tie of that, the harmony of that. And so how do we invest in the solution? Because you just told me that's keeping us from being profitable. That's keeping us from hitting that revenue number.
So sometimes when there's a disconnect, you can kind of break it down, and then you help leaders realize what the foundation of their money earning is, and that it's people. Every issue that you have to make money, it winds back down to the people.
Yeah.
And so if you can invest in that, then that foundation is solid, and it can then build and lead to those profits.
Right. Because and there's so many different doors to come into that without saying people. They feel like if you say people, they just shut down. And then they just go to, engagement. We've been throwing money at that and we don't even see it improving. So why should I spend more on that problem? But okay, let's talk about it from a different perspective. We can talk about it from a different way. Because it's often not engagement that's a problem. It's something else deeper down, right? That is just a symptom. And
the solution isn't just always throw some ping pong tables in the lunchroom or whatever. It's got to be catered and customized to the needs and the processes within that organization.
Exactly, Krista, so well said. And it's about understanding, who are we as an organization? What is this ecosystem? What is the flow? What is the flow of revenue here? And that's really the business acumen. And like, how do the executives and the key stakeholders, how are they or are they not in that flow of revenue working well together? How are our systems set up? And then the people are our foundation.
Yeah, 100%. I think, there's so many different things that we could talk about with this. I think I feel like for today's conversation, it may be the most helpful to focus on how we can help that CHRO that's, realized maybe their organization isn't seeing the vision of prioritizing people. How can we help them, get to a better place where they're aligned with their leadership team? One thought that I'm having is this is kind of like a doctor's diagnosis a little bit. Like you're in this room of executives helping them understand something that's complex,
Yeah.
some, health disease, for better term, that they can't see, or is very, difficult to, it's not tangible.
Yeah.
Like, imagine going to your doctor and saying, I'm 50 years old, or whatever, however old you are, 60, 70, whatever age you are, and then saying, I don't feel good. They're like, well, do you exercise? Well, I exercised last Tuesday. Or do you eat healthy? Well, 3 weeks ago, I ate a salad. It's like, the executive team needs to understand it's not these one-off things like, oh, we let the company do a training. Why don't they understand this? We let the company do one company party. Why aren't they happy? Like, the health of a workplace is very similar to the health of an individual, and there's momentum involved. There's patterns involved. There's consistency that's involved, and the health of an engagement of an entire workforce could ebb and flow, just like the health of an individual could ebb and flow over a lifetime. If we can help them see that, it's not as transactional. Oh, I did one run. Now what's my ROI of that one run? I ate one salad. What's the ROI? Like, it's not the same. It's a continued pattern of fostering a healthy workplace. But what are your thoughts?
What may work one year may not work the next year, and so it has to be a constant surveying, customizing, and changing, like you mentioned earlier. So I guess back to Matt's question. So what should they do about it? How should they convince that they need more decision making, more implementation, and what can they do about it?
So first of all, I feel like you both just summarized so many layered issues that we could like dig in and dive in. So, I mean, I thought there's so many nuggets of wisdom in there, I guess, is what I'm trying to highlight. But going back to your question of what could a HR leader do, it's truly about, being able to take a step back and do you understand the current state of your people, and how and where, what is the health of the people. If you're thinking about it from organizational capability, I often am seeing that the people are anemic. I've been saying that the HR function, the HR people, the organizational capability, the people part of that equation is anemic. And so what is the right way to be able to connect it to an IV of nutrients? And you're right, it's ongoing. But yet so much of how we think about HR, if we're thinking about it as tasks and activities that are not connected to the business strategy, they were created, they were launched, and they just happen. And we're not actually thinking about them as a program or as something that we do that's strategic, that we're actually monitoring, that we're actually thinking about, is this still serving? Is this still driving that strategic measure, or is it not? So that as we adjust the strategy, we should always be thinking about how are we adjusting how we work from a people perspective. And as we drop change into, even if we buy a new system, let's say we're moving to a Salesforce system, is the HR person in that strategic conversation? Are they understanding the why behind that? I think first of all, the first thing is ask the current state, where are the well-being of your people? But also, what is the strategy? What is the business acumen? How is that flow of revenue? And what strategic conversations are happening right now? And if you don't know, go get in them. Just show up. Go ask, like, when are these happening? And start listening in. Because now you're early on, you're starting to understand what is the future desired state of this organization, what's being discussed. Because if I don't know what that future desired state is, I need to know the answer of that, because I now know the current state, and then I know where we need to be. And so as I hear them talking about the strategy, now I start asking, how is that going to impact the people? Even a change like around pricing and packaging, that changes with the people who are working with the pricing and packaging. How are we communicating those pricing and packaging changing to our current customers? How are our sales team talking about that with new prospects?
Mhm.
And how are we inputting those new pricing and packaging? How are we thinking about it from an incentive standpoint? How are we putting that and keying it into our systems? That's a lot of people there, right? And do we have the skills to be able to support that? Do we feel like what happens if we have young talent that was used to having this pricing and packaging? Like, are they able to wrap, if we're really pivoting and going in a different direction, are we going to give them, how much time do they need to really feel confident and be able to speaking to that change? Are there managers? Are we going to give their managers time to understand the change, to be able to support their employees? So it's like these are the types of questions, right, that we can really start to like dive in and start asking, and then being able to like think, this is how we can help. This is like, we might want to pause here to be able to think about the communication plan, the change management of how it's going to impact those people. And from an IT perspective, let's find out what is that digital like impact going to be? Like, is the IT person in the conversation? Does he know what it's going to be like to maintain if this pricing and packaging is going to require a new tool to use? Do we know how to maintain that new tool that we're then implementing into our ecosystem? So I think it's about having that pulse and getting the signals. And you don't have to, you can't do it overnight. You have to start with one thing. Like, where's that biggest gap, the opportunity to really show a change? And being able to help understand from the key stakeholder perspective, it should be a common shared pain to begin with. Then they see the direct positive impact. And then you start to build that trust, and they're going to start asking more questions. But the first thing is like, do I even know the answers, to be able to then start being able to work with them to then suggest and propose solutions? I hope that made sense. I feel like
Yes, no, definitely. And I've seen in my own experience in workplaces and just, conversations with Matt, that those HR leaders who take the time to just go out of their office and talk to the
Yes.
people and
Yeah.
get to know them individually.
Yes.
And then, of course, one-on-ones, and then you have company-wide surveys. There's so many ways to dig that information, like you're saying. And then you're now an informed member of the people, and you can become a spokesperson at that table.
Yes.
With the other executives. So
Yes.
any last thoughts you'd like to add about that?
So human-centered design, I think, is a great way to kind of like frame up some of those conversations. It does help you to be able to take a step back, to be able to really design what is that employee journey in my organization. What are the stages an employee goes through from the moment they view my job description on a career page to the moment that they depart, and really thinking, who are the people that co-design that stage? What are the key moments within it? And then what are those digital touch points? Who's designing that with me? Because it's not just me alone. It most likely is a combination of individuals, from the department leaders to the IT. And then how are we talking to employees to really understand their feedback of what was their experience like? We don't want to assume. And so we have to talk to our people, just like you said, and understanding who are the different types of people in this organization. Because it's not just employees and managers. We've got executives, we've got line managers, we've got middle managers. Some of them been doing it for a long time. Some of it's their first time doing it, versus someone that we just hired from college versus someone that's been with us for 5 years. How we walk them through a specific experience should look and feel different. And then understanding that business acumen and where we're heading, in order to understand the why, and how that journey through depending on the stage, how do we shift it to support us always realigning and being able to execute together as one team to make those business initiatives possible, to achieve them. And that you're right. The first step is like, first of all, know who your key stakeholders are, get into those conversations, listen, be able to ask difficult questions. Don't be afraid to ask stupid questions. There really is no stupid questions. We got to learn, and you have to be afraid to fail, to learn. And then also to, use some of these tools like we've talked about to be able to kind of map out that current and future state to inform a roadmap of how can we get there, and then use data to be able to iterate and be able to always constantly be thinking about, hey, I delivered this program one slice of value in a specific period of time. How do I know if I'm successful or not? Hopefully you've identified some key success measures that then are you're monitoring, and then you're able to say, hey, now we're going to iterate. This is the next slice of change, so that you are continuously improving. You're never just finishing a project and moving on to the next project.
That's the perfect, here's your to-do list to go through, or here's your steps to move forward. And if you're an HR leader or HR individual listening to this now, and you have a chance to look at where your people are now, and maybe you've implemented some things in the past, but it's always a good time to look at what you're doing now and see if it's still working, or if some changes need to be made, which they more than likely do need to be. And just thank you so much for your time today, Mindy.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate all of the words of wisdom that you shared today. And for everyone listening, be sure to check out Mindy's websites. We'll put those links in the highlight article so you can learn more, and follow her on LinkedIn for ongoing tips as well. So thank you, everyone, for being here with us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Culture Profit podcast, and for being a part of our journey to prove that putting people first is best for business.
Today's episode was sponsored by MeBeBot.
Want to get more employee reviews and streamline your employer reputation? Visit mebeBot.com.
Now go find one way to prioritize your people and watch your profits grow.